Zara learned about smells before she learned to read. This was not something her mother planned. It was simply what happened when a 9-year-old girl spends the first years of her life waiting in hospital corridors, in clinic waiting rooms, in the break rooms of rehabilitation centers, while her mother works a double shift. You sit still enough, you quiet yourself down enough, and the world starts to teach you things no one thought to put in a book. The antiseptic bite of an examination room. The warm, powdery heaviness of a linen closet stocked with fresh towels. The sharp, almost electric smell of an Ford drip, and beneath it the fainter medicinal undertone that told you which drug was running through the line, because her mother would tell her, quietly, the way other mothers pointed out shapes in clouds. That's phenobarbital, baby. You smell that bitter underneath? That's how you know. Diane Morrison said it like she was teaching Zara to spell. Not because she thought it would matter, just because the world was full of things worth knowing, and her daughter had a mind that held on to things the way good soil holds water. By the time Zara was 6, she could tell rubbing alcohol from hydrogen peroxide by smell alone. By 7, she could walk into a room and name 3 of the medications the patient inside was taking, just from the air. Her mother's colleagues thought it was a party trick. Zara's homeroom teacher thought it was mildly alarming. Zara herself didn't think much about it at all. It was just the thing her nose did. Like how some people could whistle with 2 fingers and some people couldn't. Underscore, 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 underscore. If this story already has you leaning in, hit that like button and subscribe to Bound Hearts. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She didn't hesitate for a second. Let's see if you can stay with her all the way to the end. What Zara did think about. What she thought about most mornings while she ate her toast and watched her mother iron her work uniform at the kitchen table was how tired her mother looked. Not tired the way kids get tired after soccer practice. Tired the way buildings get tired when they've been holding weight for too long. Diane Morrison was 41 years old and had been a home health aide since she was 22. She had worked for 6 different agencies in that time, caring for patients who were recovering from strokes, from surgeries, from falls that broke bones that never quite healed right. She changed linens and took vitals and helped people in and out of bathtubs with a gentleness that her patients' own families sometimes could not summon. She did it because she was good at it, and because the world needed people who were good at it, and because her own mother had told her once that the most important work is the work that happens when no one is looking. She had raised Zara alone since Zara was 2. She did not talk about Zara's father. Zara did not ask. There was an understanding between them that went deeper than words, the kind that develops when 2 people have been a team long enough that they know each other's silences as well as their sentences. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in a neighborhood the city had not yet decided whether to gentrify or forget. The kitchen window looked out over the alley and a single tree that bloomed white every April for exactly 2 weeks before going green again. Zara had a bookshelf in her room that she'd organized by color because it looked better that way, and a science notebook where she'd been recording observations about smell since she was 7. Not because anyone told her to, just because she had noticed things and she believed in writing down what you noticed. She was in the middle of writing a new entry. Something about the way her neighbor Mr. Bassett's apartment smelled different on days when his blood pressure was high. A faint metallic note she couldn't quite explain when her mother appeared in the doorway, still wearing her coat. "We got a new placement," Diane said. Zara looked up. "Is it far?" "Other side of the park. Big house. Private client, not a facility." Her mother set down her bag. She had a particular expression when she was still turning something over in her mind. "Nice agency. Good rate." Zara knew what a good rate meant. It meant her mother might sleep more than 5 hours 2 nights in a row. It meant the conversation about the school trip to the Science Museum in November might have a different ending than the one she'd been quietly bracing for. When do you start? Zara asked. Monday, Diane said. She looked at Zara for a moment with an expression that was impossible to name. Something between pride and apology, the look she got when she was about to explain that Zara would need to come along and wait somewhere again. The client needs help 3 days a week. The agency said there's a room I can set you up in with your books. Zara nodded, already reaching for her notebook to put in her bag. Zara, I know, Mom. You know what? I know to be quiet and stay where you put me and not touch anything. Diane looked at her for another second, then smiled. It was the real smile, the one that went all the way up. You're 9 years old, she said. You shouldn't have to know how to do any of this. Zara shrugged, the way she always did when her mother said something like that. The shrug was not dismissal. The shrug was just Zara's way of saying, this is our life, and I'm not ashamed of it, so you don't have to be either. I like waiting, Zara said. I notice things. And she picked up her notebook and her 3 library books and a pencil case that had a broken zipper held shut with a rubber band, and she was ready. Underscore. The Ellison estate sat behind a black iron gate on a street that felt like a different city. Zara had been to wealthy neighborhoods before. Her mother had worked for several private clients over the years, but this was different in scale. The house was not just large. It was the kind of large that meant something, that had been built with the intention of impressing people who themselves were not easily impressed. The driveway was long and stone and flanked by trees that were older than any building in their neighborhood. The front door was dark wood with brass fittings. The windows were tall and evenly spaced and looked, Zara thought, like the eyes of someone who had learned to show nothing. They were met at the door by a man who introduced himself as Mr. Kofi. He was somewhere in his 60s, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had spent decades learning how to be present in other people's spaces without being intrusive. He shook Diane's hand and looked at Zara with the calm, acknowledging look of someone who had seen children arrive in this house before and understood that children needed to be made comfortable before they would be comfortable. You can use the library, he told Zara. There's a chair by the window that gets the afternoon light. The books are alphabetical, but you are welcome to rearrange them however makes sense to you. Zara looked up at him. Most adults, when they spoke to her, spoke to a point approximately 4 inches above her head, like they were talking to the child they expected her to be rather than the one standing in front of them. Mr. Kofi looked at her directly. Thank you, she said. He nodded, as if they had reached an agreement about something important. Underscore. Marcus Ellison came downstairs at 11 o'clock that first Monday, and Zara saw him before he saw her. She was sitting in a library chair by the window, her science notebook open to a blank page, when he appeared in the doorway in a way that suggested he had not meant to come this far. He was wearing a cardigan over a collared shirt, the kind of careful, soft clothes that sick people wear when they're trying not to look sick. He was tall, had been tall, she could tell, in the way that tall people carry themselves even when they've lost some of their uprightness. He was somewhere in his early 50s, with gray at his temples and a face that had once been very handsome and was still good-looking in the way that faces are when the person inside them has thought a great deal about difficult things. He looked like a man who had forgotten something important and was trying very hard to remember what it was. He saw her and stopped. You must be Diane's daughter, he said. Yes, sir. My name is Zara. He stood in the doorway for a moment more, as if deciding whether to come in or retreat. Then he came in slowly and sat down in the chair across from her. Not the formal one, but the worn leather one by the fireplace that clearly had a permanent impression in it from years of use. Do you like to read? He asked. I like to observe, Zara said. Then, because she could see from the slight shift in his expression that he found this answer unusual, reading is part of it. But I notice things mostly. I keep a notebook. He glanced at the notebook in her lap. What do you notice? She thought about it. Right now, I'm noticing that this room smells like old paper and cedar and something else. Something medicinal. She didn't say more than that. She had learned, early, that adults found her skill charming up to a certain point and then became uncomfortable with it. She hadn't yet figured out where that point was with this man. Marcus Ellison looked at her for a moment. "My wife used to read in here," he said. "She passed away 8 months ago." "I'm sorry," Zara said, and she meant it, and he could tell she meant it. He nodded slowly. "She would have found you very interesting," he said. It came out like something he hadn't meant to say, something that had just walked through the door on its own. Zara looked at him carefully. He did not look well. Not grief-sick, which had its own particular quality, a kind of hollowness around the eyes, a looseness in the jaw. He looked like something was happening to his body that he either didn't know about or had decided not to fight. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, had a faint tremor she might have missed if she hadn't been watching closely. His color was not right. Too pale for his complexion, too dull. She filed it away. She did not say anything. "The library is yours," he said, standing with some effort. "Come whenever you like." And he was gone. It took Zara 4 visits to understand the architecture of the Ellison estate, not the building itself, but the human architecture. Who moved where, and when, and with what kind of energy. Her mother worked the East Wing in the mornings, changing linens, monitoring vitals if Marcus allowed it, organizing medications, helping him to meals. Diane was quiet in her work, professional and warm in the way of someone who had spent years learning how to be present without being intrusive. She arrived at 8 and left at 3, and in between she moved through the estate with the efficient calm of someone who knew exactly how to exist in other people's spaces. Mr. Kofi ran the household. He managed the cook and the 2 cleaning staff and whatever repairs needed calling for. And he sat at a desk in the narrow room off the kitchen and answered correspondence in longhand because he did not trust email for anything important. He had worked for Marcus Ellison for 17 years, and his loyalty to the man was the kind you couldn't buy, the kind that develops when you have watched someone at their best and their worst and decided, quietly and finally, that they are worth staying for. And then there was Nurse Patricia Vance. Zara noticed her on the 2nd visit, and spent the 3rd and 4th visits watching her the way she watched everything, patiently from a little bit sideways, taking notes internally if not at her book. Patricia Vance was 46, although she looked younger, and she had the manner of someone who had learned how to make others feel immediately at ease and had deployed this skill so consistently for so long that it had become indistinguishable from her actual personality. She had warm dark brown hair worn in a careful knot and small gold earrings, and a smile that appeared reliably whenever another person looked at her. She was attentive to Marcus in a way that read as devoted. She was always nearby when he needed something, always soft-voiced, always just a step ahead of what he needed without quite crossing into hovering. She called him Mr. Ellison, always with a deference that was calibrated just perfectly, not too formal to be cold, not familiar enough to be presumptuous. Marcus Ellison trusted her. This was obvious. What was also obvious to Zara in the way that things became obvious when you sat still and watched long enough, was that Marcus Ellison was getting worse. Not grief worse. Something else worse. He had been declining before Zara arrived. She could see that in the easy way the staff had adapted their routines around his limitations. The practiced efficiency with which Mr. Kofi guided him to chairs or steered conversations away from anything that required sustained concentration. The doctor came on Wednesdays, and his visits were short in a way that suggested either satisfaction or resignation, and Zara couldn't tell from her library chair which one it was. But over the 4 weeks she had been coming, she had been watching the arc. And the arc was not good. His tremor was more pronounced. He slept longer after dinner. There were days when his thinking seemed to move through water. She could see it in the long pauses before he answered questions, the way he'd lose the thread of a conversation and look startled when someone brought it back. His doctor, on the most recent Wednesday visit, had used the word complicated when speaking to Patricia in the hallway. Complicated grief response, complicated symptoms, and Patricia had nodded with an expression of solemn, knowledgeable concern that Zara, watching from the library doorway, found herself staring at for a beat too long. Something about the expression was wrong. She couldn't name it yet. She wrote it down in her notebook. Something about Nurse Patricia's face when she talks about Mr. Ellison getting worse. Need more data. The tea happened every evening at 5:30. Zara had only seen it twice, both times when her mother's shift ran long and they had stayed past 5. But it was the same both times, which meant it was a ritual. Patricia would go to the kitchen, prepare Marcus's evening herbal tea in the specific blue mug he preferred, and bring it to him in the study where he sat before dinner. She would sit on the small table beside his chair with a single shortbread biscuit and a quiet word about the temperature, and he would hold it in both hands the way people hold things when they're trying to feel warm from the outside in. On the third time Zara saw it, a Thursday in October, when her mother had stayed to help Marcus through a difficult afternoon. She was sitting in the hallway with her notebook while her mother worked in the East Wing, and Patricia came past her toward the kitchen with the specific focus of someone who was running on time. She left the kitchen door slightly open. Zara did not mean to eavesdrop. She was not even listening. She was writing, or trying to write, about the smell of the cedar closet she discovered at the end of the upstairs hall. But then the smell came to her, and she stopped. It was faint. It was beneath the chamomile that floated warm and familiar out through the crack in the kitchen door. But it was there, and it was unmistakable, the way certain sounds are unmistakable once you have heard them. A note that did not belong, a presence that had no reason to be inside a cup of evening tea. Zara set down her pencil. She had smelled that particular bitter chemical note only once before, but she had smelled it in conditions that made it unforgettable. She had been 7 years old, sitting in the hallway outside the room of a patient named Mr. Pemberton, an elderly man her mother had cared for during a post-stroke recovery. Mr. Pemberton had been on phenobarbital for seizures, and the medication had a smell that was particular and persistent, a kind of clinical bitterness, almost metallic, that clung to rooms and cups, and even slightly to the person taking it. She had asked her mother about it then. Her mother had explained carefully what phenobarbital was and what it did and why Mr. Pemberton needed it. And she had said, in the right dose, it keeps his brain from seizing. In the wrong dose, over time, it damages the liver, disrupts the organs, makes you confused and slow and tired in ways a doctor might not immediately identify if they don't know to look. Zara sat very still in the hallway outside the kitchen. She was not a doctor. She was 9 years old, but she knew that smell, and she knew it had no business being in a cup of chamomile tea. She did not go to Marcus that evening. She thought about it. She sat in the hallway with her hands folded in her lap, and she thought about exactly what she knew and what she didn't know, and what the difference was between noticing something and being certain about it. She was very certain about what she had smelled. She was not certain about what it meant. She needed more data. Over the next week, she paid attention to things she had not been tracking before. She noted the timing of Marcus's worst days, the days when he couldn't follow a conversation, when his hands trembled most, when he fell asleep in his chair in the mid-afternoon. She noted when Patricia had been with him in the hours prior. She noted the tea. Every evening at 5:30. Every time the same blue mug. Every time prepared by Patricia alone in the kitchen. She also started paying attention to Patricia in a different way. Not just the manner, not just the expression, but the specifics. Patricia had a room on the second floor. Not a patient room, but a proper room with a lock on the door for the nights when Marcus had particularly difficult episodes and she stayed over. The door was almost always closed. Almost always. On the 8th day of watching, Zara was walking back from the bathroom near the end of the upstairs hall when she saw that Patricia's door was open an inch. Not all the way. Just enough. She did not go in. She was not that kind of child. She had been raised with a deep respect for other people's spaces. Not because she'd been told to respect them, but because she had spent her whole life in other people's spaces as a guest, and she understood instinctively what it meant to be the person who was allowed to stay. But she could smell from the hallway. She could smell from an inch. She stood in the hallway, and she breathed slowly, and she cataloged what came back to her. The cedar from somewhere in the room. A hairspray, light floral. The medicinal smell from the bathroom cabinet. And underneath everything, small, contained, the smell of something stored rather than used. That same bitter note. The one from the kitchen. The one from the tea. She did not go in. She went back to the library. She sat down in the window chair and opened her notebook. She wrote, "Same smell. Her room. Patricia is keeping something in her room that matches what I smelled in the tea. I need someone to believe me." The first person she tried was Mr. Kofi. She chose him because he was careful in the way that she was careful. Observant, unhurried, the kind of person who paid attention to the things most people dismissed. She chose him on a Thursday morning when her mother was working in the East Wing and Patricia was out with Marcus for his weekly short walk in the garden. She found him at his desk in the room off the kitchen, writing something in his deliberate longhand. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and he did that thing he always did, looked at her directly at eye level like she was a person he intended to take seriously. "Mr. Kofi," she said, "I need to tell you something." He set down his pen. This, Zara noticed, was important. He did not put it down slowly, as a performance of patience. He simply put it down, which meant he had decided this mattered before he knew what it was. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, and she told him. She told him about the smell and the tea. She told him about Mr. Pemberton and phenobarbital and what her mother had explained about what it does in wrong doses over time. She told him about the smell in Patricia's room. She told him about the arc she'd been watching, the tremor, the confusion, the timing. She did not tell him what to do about it. She told him only what she knew. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You have a very unusual skill," he said finally. "I know," she said, "but that's not the point." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked at her steadily. "You're certain about what you smelled?" "Yes." "A 9-year-old who can identify a control medication by smell," he said. Not challenging. Thinking out loud. "My mother taught me," Zara said. "She works in medical care. I've been around it my whole life." She paused. "I know what I smell, Mr. Kofi. I've been smelling things my whole life, and I don't get them wrong." He was quiet again. She could not tell what was happening behind his eyes. She waited. This was one of the things she was good at, waiting without filling the silence, because she had learned that silence, given enough space, usually led to the truth. "Mr. Ellison has been declining," Mr. Kofi said at last. "I've been watching it. The doctors attribute it to grief. Complicated grief." He said the phrase the way people say something they've been told many times without quite believing it. "I know," Zara said. "That's what I'm worried about." He looked at her for a long time. "I'm not saying I don't believe you," he said carefully. "I know," she said again. "You're saying you need more before you can do anything." He nodded slowly. "Yes." Zara reached into her notebook and turned it to the page where she'd been keeping her observations. She slid it across his desk. He read it slowly, page by page, his expression very still. When he gave it back, he said, "Keep watching. And don't say anything to Nurse Vance." She nodded. And Zara, she was already standing. "Don't go near her room again." She nodded again and went back to the library. _ 2 days later, Zara asked Marcus Ellison directly. She had thought about it carefully. She had considered the angles, the words, the most useful way to say it. She had decided, finally, that there was no clever way. There was only the direct way. She found him in the sitting room in the late afternoon, before the evening tea, sitting with a book open in his lap that he had clearly not been reading. He looked up when she came in. "Zara," he said. He had started using her name like this over the weeks. Not as a greeting, but as a kind of recognition, as if each time she appeared he was reminding himself that she was real, that this specific child existed, and he was glad of it. She sat down across from him, the way she always did. She folded her hands in her lap. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "how do you feel in the mornings, before you've had anything?" He blinked. "I'm sorry. In the morning, when you first wake up. Before breakfast, before your tea. How do you feel?" He seemed to consider this seriously, the way he considered most things she said. She had noticed this about him, that he did not dismiss her questions the way adults sometimes dismiss children's questions, as if the children were not really asking. Tired, he said. I feel tired, but I've felt tired for months now. Does her head hurt? Sometimes. He looked at her more carefully now. What is this about? Do you feel clearer in the mornings than in the evenings? A pause. A longer one. I suppose I do, he said slowly. I've noticed that. The doctor said it's the natural rhythm of grief. That it's harder at the end of the day. Zara looked at him. He was looking back at her with a kind of patient attention. But she could see, too, the wall behind the patient's. The place where he had already stored the doctor's explanation and was not sure yet whether to defend it. She chose her words very carefully. Mr. Ellison, she said, I notice smells. It's something I can do. I've always been able to do it. I spent a lot of time in medical settings when I was little, and I learned the smells of a lot of different medications. She paused. I think there might be something in your evening tea that shouldn't be there. The silence that followed was very specific. Not the silence of someone about to get angry. Not the silence of someone dismissing. The silence of someone whose own body has been telling them something for a long time and who has just heard someone else say it out loud. He looked at her for 10 full seconds. She counted. Then he said, very quietly, That's a very serious thing to say. I know, she said. Do you know what you're suggesting? Yes. About Nurse Vance. Yes. He set the book aside with a movement that was careful and deliberate, the movement of a man controlling a reaction he was not yet sure what to do with. Zara, he said, Patricia has been with me for over a year. She cared for my wife during her final months. He stopped. Something crossed his face that was complicated and layered and had a history behind it she couldn't see all of. I know she has, Zara said. She did not push. She had said what she came to say. You're a child, he said finally, not unkindly, with something that was almost sorrow. I know, she said for the third time. She stood up. I just wanted you to know what I smell. She left the room. He did not call her back. That evening, she watched through the doorway of the library as Patricia carried the blue mug from the kitchen to the study. She watched Marcus's hands close around it. She watched him lift it to his lips. She had done everything she could do. It was not enough. Underscore, 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 underscore that night. In the back seat of her mother's car on the way home, Zara was quiet in a way that Diane knew meant something. Talk, Diane said. Zara talked. She told her mother everything. The smell, Mr. Kofi, Marcus. She told her about Mr. Pemberton and phenobarbital, and the way the smell from the kitchen and the smell from Patricia's room were the same. She told her about the arc she'd been watching, the timing, the tremor, the tea. Diane drove in silence for 2 full blocks. Zara, she said, you understand what you're saying. Yes. You're saying a nurse is deliberately giving a patient a sedative medication without his knowledge or consent. Her voice was level, not disbelieving, measuring. I'm saying his evening tea smells like it has phenobarbital in it, Zara said. I'm saying the smell is in Patricia's room too. I'm saying it gets worse in the evenings and better in the mornings, and nobody has looked at the tea. Another silence. I could be wrong about the specific drug, Zara said. I'm not. I could be wrong about what it is exactly. But I'm not wrong that something is in the tea that shouldn't be in the tea. I have never been wrong about a smell, Mom. This was true, and Diane knew it was true, and the fact that it was true was the thing she was sitting with in the 2 blocks of silence. Her daughter had never been wrong about a smell. She had identified her own aunt's urinary infection before anyone else noticed the symptoms, just from the faint metabolic change in the air when she walked past her bedroom door. She had told Diane 3 months ago that a client at the memory care facility where Diane worked extra shifts was being oversedated, and when Diane had quietly raised it with the duty nurse, they had found the medication log inconsistencies the same afternoon. Zara had never been wrong. I'll look into it, Diane said carefully, quietly. Don't do anything dramatic. I haven't been dramatic, Zara said, slightly indignant. I know. I'm saying don't start now. If this story has found you, Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Bound Hearts. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. Underscore what Diane knew and what she did not tell Zara that night, because Zara was 9 years old, and there are things you carry alone even when you have a very good partner, was that she had been noticing things too. In the specific, clinical way of someone who took vitals regularly and tracked them without always being asked to, Diane had been watching Marcus Ellison's numbers. His blood pressure ran on the low side of acceptable, which could mean many things and usually meant nothing. But his liver enzyme results, which he had seen once when she was filing papers Patricia had left on the kitchen counter, had flagged slightly high. Not dramatically, not the kind of high that set off alarms, but the kind that warranted a follow-up that, as far as Diane could tell, had not been followed up. She had noted it in her own way, internally filed under watch and see. Now she pulled it out and looked at it differently. She thought about Patricia Vance, who had been with this household for 14 months, brought on during Mrs. Ellison's illness, kept on afterward at the specific request of Marcus, who found her presence comforting. She thought about the way Patricia ran the household medical routine, with a control that was almost total. She was the one who filled the prescriptions, the one who communicated with the doctors, the one who briefed the agency when they sent Diane's reports back through the system. She thought about the estate, and who stood to benefit from a man who was confused and weak and increasingly dependent. She thought about these things very carefully, and then she thought about her daughter, who was 9 years old and had never been wrong about a smell. On Friday morning, she arrived at the estate 40 minutes before her shift was scheduled to start, while Patricia was still in her room upstairs and Marcus was still sleeping, and she went to the kitchen and she stood in front of the shelf where the herbal teas were kept. There were 2 rows of tins. The front row was the household's general supply: chamomile, peppermint, a green blend, a sleep tea for guests. The back row, pushed slightly behind, was a single tin with a handwritten label that simply said Marcus, evening. Diane looked at that tin for a long time. Then she carefully, quietly, using a clean piece of plastic wrap from the kitchen drawer, took a small amount of the dried herbs from inside the tin and wrapped them tightly and put the small packet in the front pocket of her work bag. She arranged everything exactly as she'd found it. She was back in the East Wing by the time her shift officially began. Underscore that Saturday, Zara went to Mr. Kofi. She went on a Saturday because Patricia did not work Saturdays. The estate had a different rhythm on weekends, quieter, and Kofi was always there, the constant thread. She found him in the garden, which he tended in the slow, deliberate way he did everything, moving along the stone path with a pair of shears and a purposeful attention to each plant. "I need to tell you something else," she said. He looked up. "Walk with me," he said. She walked with him along the garden path while he deadheaded the late roses, and she told him about the second tin, the one with the handwritten label, the one pushed to the back. He stopped walking. He stood very still for a moment with the shears in his hand. "You didn't touch it," he said. "My mother touched it," Zara said. "She took a small sample. She's going to find out if I'm right." He looked at her for a long time. Behind his steady eyes, she could see something moving, the calculation of someone who has been loyal for a long time and is now being asked whether that loyalty extends to looking away and finding quietly that it does not. "There's something else," Zara said. He waited. "Mr. Ellison's estate documents," she said. "I don't know about this part as well as I know about the smells. But Mr. Ellison has mentioned his will twice in the last month. He mentioned it once to you. I heard him say it. And once to his doctor on Wednesday. He seemed confused about what it said, like he'd signed something he didn't fully remember signing." Kofi was very still. "I don't know if that matters," Zara said. "I just know I noticed it." He looked at her for another long moment. "How old are you, Zara?" 9, she said. 9 in 3 months. He nodded slowly, like this was an answer that meant something to him. Then he said, "Go to the library. Stay there today. I'm going to make some calls." She went. The following Tuesday was the day it happened. Not because Zara planned it. She had been, in fact, attempting to be exactly as unobtrusive as she had promised her mother she would be. But things that need to happen have a way of arriving on their own schedule. And on Tuesday, at 5:20, Zara was walking back from the bathroom near the kitchen when she turned the corner and found herself 3 feet from Patricia Vance, who was standing at the kitchen counter with the blue mug in her hand and the private tin open beside her. Zara stopped. Patricia looked up. Her expression did not change. That was the thing Zara noticed first, that her expression did not change in the way that innocent people's expressions change when they are startled. The smile came on exactly as it always came on, measured and warm and deployed. "Zara," Patricia said pleasantly. "Are you lost?" Zara looked at the mug. She looked at the tin. She could smell it from 3 feet away. The chamomile layered over that bitter chemical note, the specific wrongness of something that did not belong. She was not entirely sure, in that moment, what she was going to do. She had been trying to be patient. She had been trying to wait for Kofi and her mother and whatever quiet process they were running. But Marcus Ellison was sitting in his study 20 feet away, waiting for that cup. "Nurse Vance," Zara said, and her voice was very steady, the way her mother's voice was steady when she needed it to be. "What's in Mr. Ellison's tea?" Patricia's smile held. "Chamomile," she said. "His usual blend." "No," Zara said. "Something else." The smile did not waver, but something behind it did. A small recalibration, the adjustment of someone who has just realized this is not the conversation they expected to be having. "You have quite an imagination," Patricia said, still pleasantly. "Why don't you go back to your library? And I know what phenobarbital smells like," Zara said. She said it the way her mother said things she needed to be heard. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with a completeness that left no room for interpretation. "I've known it since I was 6 years old. I smelled in the tea last month, and I smelled it in your room, and I'm smelling it right now." Something shifted in Patricia's face. Something beneath the performance. "That is an extraordinary accusation," she said. Her voice had changed, still controlled, but now without the warmth, like a room from which the furniture has been suddenly removed. "I know," Zara said, and then she made a decision. Not a calculated decision. Not the kind she had been making for the past weeks, careful and measured and based on evidence. A decision that came from somewhere deeper, from the part of her that had been watching Marcus Ellison shuffle through his own house like a man underwater, from the part that had counted his tremors and timed his confusion and stood in the library doorway and felt, in the specific, inarticulate way of someone who pays very close attention, the wrongness of it all accumulating. She reached past Patricia and picked up the blue mug. "Zara." Patricia's voice was sharp now, the pleasantness gone. Zara turned and walked, quickly and directly, out of the kitchen and down the hallway and into the study, and she set the mug on the shelf above the fireplace, not the table where it normally went. And she turned to face Marcus Ellison, who had looked up from his chair with an expression of confusion that was already, in these early evening hours, edged with the particular fog she'd been watching for weeks. "Don't drink that," she said. He blinked. "Zara, don't drink it, sir." She stood in front of the fireplace, and she did not move, and she did not look away from him. "I know I'm 9 years old. I know I'm not a doctor. I know you don't have any reason to believe me, except that I'm standing here telling you the truth." She took a breath. "Your tea smells wrong. It has smelled wrong every evening for as long as I've been coming here. And I know what the wrong smell is, and it is not anything that should be in chamomile tea." Marcus Ellison looked at her. Behind her, Patricia had come into the doorway. She said his name, Marcus, with a specific inflection, the one she used when she was guiding him away from something, when she was gentle steering him back toward the version of reality she needed him to occupy. He looked past Zara at Patricia. Then he looked at Zara again. "You knocked the mug off the shelf," Patricia said from the doorway. "She knocked it, Marcus." "She walked right past me and took it. I don't know what I didn't knock anything," Zara said without turning around. She kept her eyes on Marcus. "The mug is on the shelf. It's not knocked over. It's whole." She paused. I just didn't want you to drink it before someone better than me can check what's in it. Marcus Ellison looked at her. She watched him look at her. Really look at her, not in the polite, kind way he looked at her when they talked about books or her mother or the smell of the cedar closet, but in the way people look at something when they have been trying to see it for a long time and it has finally come into focus. The silence lasted a long time. Then he said, very quietly, Patricia. Patricia said his name again, warm, concerned, redirecting. Please leave the room, he said. Patricia left. She did not leave the house. Zara could hear her in the hallway, hear the deliberate, unhurried sound of her footsteps moving toward the kitchen, the controlled quality of her presence in the house. Staying, waiting, the specific patience of someone who has not yet decided how threatened they should feel. Marcus sat in his chair and looked at the mug on the shelf and did not reach for it. Zara did not sit down. She stood by the fireplace and waited. Tell me, he said. All of it. She told him. The same thing she had told Mr. Kofi, but now directly to him, in full. The first evening she smelled something wrong. The smell from Patricia's room, what her mother had taken from the back tin, what she knew about phenobarbital and what it did over time. She told him about the estate documents he'd mentioned twice in the last month in tones of confusion. She told him about watching his tremor and his thinking and the specific pattern of better mornings and worse evenings. She told him all of it the way she had learned to tell things, clearly, without embellishment, exactly what she knew and exactly what she didn't know, and exactly why the line between them mattered. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a very long time. The study was almost dark now. The October light had gone down while they were talking, and only the lamp beside his chair threw a circle of warmth across the room. Zara, he said finally, how long have you been watching this? About 6 weeks, she said. He looked at her. 6 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. He passed his hand over his face. It was a gesture of a man who is looking at a truth that is large and close and requires him to rearrange things he believed were settled. Patricia nursed my wife, he said, not defending, trying to understand. I know. She was. Eleanor trusted her. My wife trusted her. I know, Zara said again. He trusted her. There was something in his voice now that was very human and very tired. The sound of someone who has been lonely for a long time and had organized some of that loneliness around a person who was not who they believed them to be. Zara understood that this was its own kind of grief, layered on the grief he was already carrying. She did not say anything. She waited, because she had learned that silence was sometimes the most useful thing. I have not felt well, he said, after a while. I thought it was the doctor said. He stopped. I wake up some mornings, and for 1 hour I think clearly, and then something settles over me, and I can't. He stopped again. I thought it was losing Eleanor. It might be both, Zara said carefully. The grief is real, but something is also making the grief worse. He looked at her, this 9-year-old girl, standing at his fireplace with her notebook tucked under her arm and her sneakers worn at the toes, and Zara could see, very clearly, the exact moment he stopped treating her like a child who might be right and started treating her like a person who was. I need to call my doctor, he said. Yes, she said. And Mr. Kofi already knows what I know. He's been watching too. Marcus pressed the intercom on his desk. Kofi, he said. The response was immediate. Kofi had been, Zara suspected, within easy distance of the intercom for the past 20 minutes. Sir, please come to the study. Underscore. Patricia Vance requested that Diane and Zara be removed from the estate that same evening. She made the request calmly, professionally, in a private conversation with Mr. Kofi in the kitchen while Marcus was on the phone with his physician. She cited Zara's erratic behavior with the mug. She cited her concern that a child in a medical setting created unnecessary complications. She was entirely reasonable, entirely warm, and she made the case in the measured language of someone who has experience presenting herself as the solution to the problem she creates. Kofi listened to all of it. Then he said, very quietly, "The agency has been notified that Diane Morrison's services are needed through the end of the contract period. I'll be sure they know." Patricia looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face that she did not quite contain in time. "Mr. Ellison should be the one making that call," she said. "He is," Kofi said. "Through me." Patricia left the kitchen. Diane had been in the East Wing during all of this. Zara found her mother at the end of the hallway, helping Marcus's evening aide settle him for the night. Marcus had decided, with a firmness that surprised everyone, that he would have no evening tea tonight and would retire early. Zara stood at the end of the hallway and watched her mother move through her work with the same quiet competence she always had, and she felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. "Mom," she said when Diane came out. Diane looked at her, read her face the way she always did, completely, in 1 second. "What happened?" "I told him," Zara said. "He believed you?" Zara thought about Marcus in the chair, looking at the mug on the shelf, the hand over his face, the long silence. "He's getting there," she said. Diane crouched down to eye level with her daughter. She still did this, even though Zara was almost as tall as her shoulder, and looked at her seriously. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Zara said. "I'm always fine when I know what I noticed was real." Diane put a hand on the side of her face for a moment. Just a hand, for a moment, the way you touch something you're grateful for. "Your mother called you over for this," said a voice behind them. They both turned. Mr. Kofi stood in the hallway with a folder under his arm. His expression was very grave. "I've been on the phone with a physician colleague, not Mr. Ellison's regular doctor, someone I trust independently." He looked at Diane. "The sample you collected from the tin, I've arranged for it to be analyzed. We will have results by Thursday." Diane straightened. She looked at Kofi for a long moment with an expression of professional calm and personal complexity. "You knew," she said. "Not an accusation. A recognition." "I suspected," he said carefully. "I had no evidence until recently." He looked at Zara. "A 9-year-old gave me evidence." Zara shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the way she did when adults looked at her like she had done something worth looking at. She found this uncomfortable. She had simply noticed things. "What happens now?" Diane asked. "Thursday," he said. "We wait for Thursday." Thursday arrived in the gray and ordinary way of days that are about to be significant. Nothing in the morning suggested what the afternoon would hold. Zara went to the estate with her mother, as usual. She went to the library. She opened her notebook to a blank page and sat with it for a while without writing anything. At 1 o'clock, a man she didn't recognize arrived at the estate. A doctor, she could tell from the bag and from the specific focused efficiency with which he moved through the entrance hall. He went directly to Kofi's office and the door closed. At 1:30, Marcus Ellison's personal physician arrived, summoned, Zara would later understand, by Marcus himself, who had spent 2 sleepless days reading the medical literature on phenobarbital poisoning and had arrived at his own conclusions without yet having the test results to confirm them. At 2 o'clock, Patricia Vance was called to Marcus's study. Zara was not in the study. She was in the library, which shared a wall with the study, and the walls of the Ellison estate were very thick. She heard none of what was said, but she heard the rhythm of it. The long, quiet voices of 2 men, Marcus and Kofi, she thought, and then a woman's voice, first even and then less even, and then a silence that stretched so long she counted slowly to 47 before it ended. At 2:20, Kofi appeared in the library doorway. "Come with me," he said. The study was very still. Marcus sat behind his desk. He looked exhausted in a way that was different from the exhaustion she had been watching for weeks. This was the exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a fear they couldn't name and has just been given the name for it. His hands were flat on the desk. He was not trembling. The physician, Dr. Ames, who had evaluated the sample, stood near the window with a folder in his hand. Marcus's own doctor stood beside him, his expression the specific stricken look of a physician who has realized that the picture of a patient he was given was not the whole picture. Patricia Vance stood near the door. She did not look disheveled. She did not look frightened. She looked, Zara thought, like someone who had known this moment was coming and had decided in advance that the only viable posture was complete composure. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her expression was controlled. She was still in the persona, still wearing the warm, professional face, but the warmth had a different quality now, the quality of something maintained by effort. Diane stood near the wall, her hands quiet at her sides, her face unreadable in the particular way it got when she was managing something internal. Zara stood just inside the doorway. The sample from the tin, Dr. Ames said, speaking to the room, shows a combination of phenobarbital and a secondary sedative compound. The concentration is consistent with an amount that, administered daily over several months, would produce exactly the pattern of symptoms Mr. Ellison has been experiencing. He paused. Confusion, tremor, fatigue, impaired judgment, elevated liver enzymes. These are all consistent with long-term low-dose phenobarbital exposure. He looked at Patricia. He had the manner of a man who wanted to say several things and was choosing only the most essential. The tin in the kitchen is a separate supply from the household tea, he continued. It was kept distinct. The label on the tin is in handwriting consistent with, he paused, a sample we were able to obtain for comparison. Patricia said nothing. The estate attorney has also been notified, Marcus said. His voice was very level, almost unnervingly level. He reviewed the documents I signed 14 months ago and several that followed. There are amendments to my estate plan that I have no recollection of signing. Some of them are dated on days when my calendar shows I had no scheduled appointments, and which fall on days my physician notes I was experiencing significant cognitive confusion. Still, Patricia said nothing. You were with Eleanor when she died, Marcus said. Not loudly, not with rage, with the steady, almost terrible quiet of a man who is putting things down one by one and will not pick them up again. She was sick for 2 years. She trusted you with her last months. I trusted you with mine. He looked at her without flinching. And you decided that the most valuable thing about me was what I was worth when I was no longer making decisions clearly. Patricia's composure, finally, showed a crack. Not a collapse. A single, visible seam. Marcus, my name, he said, is Mr. Ellison. The room was silent. The security officer Kofi had arranged for earlier in the day appeared at the doorway. The estate attorney was on the phone in the next room. The legal process would unfold from here, through institutions larger than any one person in this study, through police reports and medical testimony and the attorney's careful review of what had been manipulated and what could be recovered. Patricia left the room with the security officer. She left with perfect posture. That, Zara thought, was the most unsettling thing, that she left looking exactly like herself. After she was gone, the room let out a collective breath that no one had realized it was holding. Underscore. Marcus Ellison looked across the room at Zara. She was still standing near the doorway. She had not moved through any of it. She had stood there and watched and been a witness the way she had been a witness to things all her life, quietly, completely, without needing to be at the center of them. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Come here." She walked across the room and stood in front of his desk. He looked at her directly, the way Mr. Kofi looked at her, the way her mother looked at her, like she was a person of complete substance. "You have been watching this for 6 weeks," he said. "Yes. You told me 2 weeks ago. I didn't believe you. You believed me enough to not drink the tea," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous way to put it." "It's what happened," she said simply. He looked at his hands, then back at her. "I'd already painted a room yellow," he said quietly. A non sequitur that was not a non sequitur. She didn't know the reference, but she could feel the weight of what he meant. Something lost, something wanted, something that had driven him into a particular kind of loneliness. I have spent the last year trying to find something to do with myself that feels like it matters. And I'll let the wrong person be the answer to that question." He paused, and a 9-year-old girl noticed what I couldn't see. "Your doctor couldn't see it either," Zara said. Nurse Vance controlled the information he was getting. "I know," he said. "That's not quite what I meant." He looked at her. "I mean, I didn't see it because it was easier not to. I should know better. I've built things. I've made decisions." He stopped. "You had no reason to involve yourself. You could have told your mother and left it at that. You're a child. You shouldn't have had to carry this." Zara looked at him. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "I noticed something wrong. I said what I noticed. That's not carrying something. That's just—" She thought about how to finish. "That's just what you do." He looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said finally. "I suppose it is." The days that followed were complicated, in the way that exposure always is. Not clean, not simple, requiring many phone calls and legal consultations and medical evaluations and the slow, patient untangling of 14 months of carefully managed information. Marcus Ellison began a treatment protocol designed to address the damage the prolonged sedation had done to his liver and his cognitive function. His own physician, mortified, now properly informed, now genuinely aligned, was attentive in a way that suggested a man re-earning his own professional regard. Within 10 days, the difference was visible. The tremor lessened. The fog cleared. The man who shuffled through his own house began to walk through it with something closer to intention. Mr. Kofi watched this with the expression of someone who has stood a long post and is finally, quietly, standing down. Patricia Vance's case moved through the appropriate channels. There would be a hearing. There would, in time, be consequences proportional to what she had done. Not theatrical, not cinematic, but real and lasting. The estate attorney worked to identify and reverse the document manipulations that could be reversed. Some of what she'd altered was recoverable. Some of it would take longer. These things happened, and they were important, and they were handled by people whose job it was to handle them. Underscore. What Zara remembered later was not any of that. What she remembered was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the day in the study, when Marcus Ellison appeared in the doorway of the library where she was sitting in the window chair and asked if she would take a walk with him. They walked in the garden. The late October garden, gone mostly to seed now, the roses finished, the trees bare. He moved through it better than he had a month ago, still deliberate, still careful, but with a quality that was different, like he was actually there in the garden rather than somewhere far away. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay," she said. "What do you want to be?" She thought about it. It was a question people asked her differently than they asked other children. Most adults, when they asked a 9-year-old what she wanted to be, expected the answer in categories. Doctor, teacher, astronaut. A noun. Marcus asked it the way Mr. Kofi asked questions, like he was actually interested in the answer, whatever form it arrived in. "I want to understand how things work," she said. "Specifically, I want to understand how the body works, how it responds to things, how it can be helped and how it can be hurt." She thought about the smell of hospitals and the smell of medications and the smell of Mr. Pemberton's hallway and the smell of Marcus's evening tea. "I think I want to be a toxicologist or a forensic pharmacologist, something like that." He looked at her. "At 9, I've known since I was 7, she said. "I just didn't know the word for it until last year." He was quiet for a moment. They walked along the stone path between the bare rose beds. "Your mother," he said. "Tell me about her." Zara told him, not everything but the shape of it. The double shifts and the night clinics and the ironing board at 6 in the morning and the library books Diane never quite had time to read herself, and the way she talked about her work not as a burden, but as something she believed in, something that mattered, something worth doing correctly even when no one was watching, and especially then. Marcus listened all the way through without interrupting. "I've been thinking," he said, when she finished, "about what it means that your mother brought you here, about the fact that a child spent 6 weeks in my house, noticing something no adult was willing to notice." He looked out over the garden. I've been thinking about what was spent on your side for something I was unable to protect on my own. My mother got paid to come here, Zara said. That's not what I mean, he said gently. I know what your mother was paid. He paused. What I mean is that your mother comes here tired, always tired, working 2 jobs for a rate that should be higher than it is for the skill and care she brings to every single patient she touches. And she leaves a child who should be able to sit at a desk at home with her books, instead waiting in hallways, waiting in libraries. He looked at Zara, and that child from that library saved my life. Zara looked at her shoes. I noticed a smell, she said. You noticed a smell? He agreed. And you did not let anyone talk you out of what you knew. And you were 9 years old, and you were the only one who didn't look away. She didn't say anything. The garden was very quiet. I'm going to make a proposal to your mother, he said. And I want to make sure you understand first that this is not a transaction. It is not payment for what you did, because what you did is not something I can pay for with money. It is simply what a person does when they have more than they need, and they have met someone who needs access to what their work makes possible. She looked up at him. What kind of proposal? He told her. Underscore. He had spoken with Diane first, alone, at the kitchen table on the previous Friday, while Zara was in the library. He had done this deliberately and carefully, understanding that the conversation needed to happen adult to adult, with Zara's mother in the position she occupied, as the person who made decisions, as the person whose dignity was not negotiable. He had not offered charity. He had offered a position, a full-time role as the estate's on-site health coordinator, managing the care standards for his own ongoing recovery, and, in time, for a small foundation he was establishing to support home health aid training and compensation advocacy. A salary that reflected the actual value of the work. Benefits. A schedule that made sense for a single parent. He had told her it was a job, not a gift. He had told her she was qualified for it. More than qualified, and that he would understand completely if she didn't want to work for someone she had already, in some sense, had to rescue. Diane had sat with that for 3 days. She had sat with it the way she sat with everything important, quietly from all angles, looking at what was real and what was pride and what was the difference between the two. On the 3rd day, she said yes. Not because it solved everything, not because it transformed her life in an instant, but because it was a genuine and respectful thing being offered by a man who had finally understood what it meant to receive genuine and respectful help, and because her daughter was 9 years old and the school trip to the Science Museum in November cost $45 and she was tired of the math. Underscore. Marcus told Zara one more thing. There in the garden. Your mother mentioned a school, he said. A science magnet program. She said you were in line for a placement next year, but there were fees. Zara said nothing. She was watching his face. I've established a small endowment at that school, he said. In my wife's name, Eleanor Ellison was a chemist. She worked in pharmaceutical research for 30 years. He paused. She would have wanted it to go to exactly the kind of child who keeps a notebook of observations and spends her free time learning the names of medications. He looked at Zara. It will cover the fees for as long as you choose to be there. And a lab equipment fund. And whatever else you need to become the thing you already are. Zara stood in the October garden and did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, What was she like? Your wife. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She noticed things? She was always the one in the room who saw what everyone else missed. He looked at the bare rose beds. You would have liked her very much. Zara thought about that. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Are you going to be okay? She looked up at him. Not the medical stuff. I mean the other part. The loneliness part. He looked at her for a moment, and something in his face shifted in a way that was very quiet and very complete. I'm working on it, he said. I think it helps to have people around who tell you the truth. Zara considered this, and she put out her hand. He looked at it for a moment. Her 9-year-old hand, held out with the same directness she brought to everything. Then he took it, and they shook, formally, in the bare October garden, like two people who had decided to be honest with each other and were confirming it. "Good," she said, and they turned and walked back toward the house. Winter came. The estate changed with it. Lighter, somehow, in the way that places change when whatever has been wrong in them is finally addressed and the air has a chance to settle back into itself. Marcus Ellison's recovery was not dramatic. It was the kind of recovery that happens in increments, over months, the body slowly reclaiming what the months of contamination had taken from it. His physician came weekly now and left satisfied. His sister, who lived 2 hours away and had been increasingly alarmed by the calls she'd been receiving from Kofi, drove down and spent a weekend and left looking less alarmed than she'd arrived. The tremor continued to diminish. The thinking continued to sharpen. He was slowly becoming again the man he'd been before, or a version of that man, changed in ways that were visible to anyone who'd known him before, and which Mr. Kofi described privately as more like himself, but different, in a way that is sometimes better. He began to take meetings again, not because someone needed him to, but because he wanted to, because there was a foundation to establish and a board to assemble and a mission to give precise language to the work of turning a private reckoning into something that existed in the world and did some good in it. He kept, on the corner of his desk, a piece of paper in a child's handwriting that read, "For William. So you don't forget you have a team." It was not for William. It was the only piece of paper in a child's handwriting he had ever received, and the name was wrong, and he kept it because both of those things were exactly right. Underscore Patricia Vance's case was adjudicated the following spring. The charges were serious. The evidence, the sample Diane had collected, the test results, the estate document irregularities, the testimony of 2 physicians and one very composed 9-year-old who sat in a room full of adults and told them exactly what she had smelled and exactly when and exactly how she knew, was extensive and clear. She received consequences commensurate with what she had done. They were not gentle consequences. They were not disproportionate ones. They were simply the natural result of having been patient and careful and strategic and almost completely successful, undone in the end by a child she had never considered a threat, because she had not looked at the child long enough to understand what was there. Diane Morrison started her new role in November. The first morning, she drove to the estate without Zara in the passenger seat, because Zara was in school, at a school with a lab and a library and a dedicated toxicology elective that she had already identified as the best part of her week. She sat in the parking area for a moment before going in. She thought about the kitchen table at 6 in the morning with the ironing board up and the uniform pressed and the toast cooling in the toaster. She thought about the $45 and the math and the way you learn to do the math so automatically that you stop noticing you're doing it. She thought about her daughter at 9 years old, sitting in hallways with a notebook, noticing things, filing them away, trusting what she knew. She thought about what it meant to have raised someone who could do that, who had done that. Not because anyone asked her to, not because she expected anything from it, but because she was in the room and something was wrong and she was the one who could see it. Then she got out of the car and went inside to do her work. Underscore on the last Friday before the winter break, Zara stayed late at school to finish a lab project. Something to do with chemical indicators and pH testing and a hypothesis she developed about the relationship between certain metallic smells and specific compound structures. Her teacher stayed with her, which Zara had not asked for but accepted, understanding that the teacher was interested in what she was doing for its own sake rather than as a supervision obligation. At 4:45, her mother arrived. She was wearing a coat Zara had not seen before, a good one, dark wool, the kind that did not come from the secondhand store. She stood in the lab doorway and looked at her daughter, standing at a workbench with safety goggles pushed up on her head and a notebook open beside her and several small labeled vials arranged in a careful row, and her expression was not one she tried to manage or contain. It was simply on her face. "Ready," Diane said. "2 more minutes," Zara said, writing something in the notebook. Diane waited. 2 minutes later, Zara capped the last vial, labeled it, closed the notebook, and pulled off the goggles. She came to the doorway and looked up at her mother. "Good day," Diane asked. "Very good day," Zara said. "I think I figured something out about metallic smell signatures. I need to talk to Dr. Ames about it, the toxicologist. He said I could email him." Diane looked at her for a long moment. "You know what your grandmother used to say?" she said finally. "The most important work happens when no one is looking," Zara said. "Yes." Diane pulled her into a brief, firm hug, the kind that was not a production, the kind that was simply two people who had been a team long enough that the hug was just the physical form of what was already understood between them. "What did you see today?" Diane asked the old question in the game. Zara thought about the lab, the vials, the specific bitter chemical precision of the afternoon's work. She thought about a blue mug on a kitchen shelf and a man in a chair who had finally stopped looking past her, and a garden in October and a handshake. "Something worth writing down," she said, and they went home. Underscore. Underscore. There is a particular kind of child the world has always struggled to see clearly. Too young to be taken seriously. Too small to be taken as a threat. Too observant for the room's comfort. Too direct for its preference. The world looks at this child and sees what is convenient to see. A curiosity, a pleasant presence, a manageable background detail in someone else's larger story. But this child is watching. This child has been watching since before she could walk, absorbing the language of the world's overlooked details, the smell of a room, the pattern of a tremor, the timing of a man's worst hours, the specific bitterness in a cup of tea that everyone else trusted and she could not. She does not raise her voice. She does not beg to be believed. She stands where she is with what she knows, and she says it clearly, and she keeps saying it until the right person is finally quiet enough to hear. She is 9 years old. She is the reason the right man is still alive. She is exactly who she always was, in an apartment with a bookshelf organized by color and a notebook full of observations, heading toward a future that looks different now. Not because someone decided to save her, but because she refused to look away from what she saw. And the world, which had not been paying attention, looks different now because she did. Underscore. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another child the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.